The sky over the River Clyde didn't just split open. It tore with the screech of tortured titanium, venting a thick wall of neon-green atmospheric plasma that bathed the rainy, cobbled streets of central Glasgow in an eerie, sickly glow. Above the towering Victorian spires of George Square, 300 colossal, multi-jointed dreadnoughts of the Xylarian hegemony descended from the clouds. They were the apex predators of the Orion Arm, gleaming towers of bioengineered armor and particle cannons that had reduced the proudest capitals of 3 galaxies to smoking ash within a single afternoon. Inside the Grand Command chariot hanging beneath the lead flagship, Supreme Commander Vraksh, a 7-foot-tall, 4-armed conqueror whose chest was armored in the calcified skulls of conquered civilizations, lifted his primary hololithic broadcaster. His 4 yellow ocular sensors gleamed with ruthless, imperial amusement. "Hear me, primitive inhabitants of this designated landing sector." Vraksh's synthesized voice boomed through every speaker, television, and radio frequency across the city, vibrating the very rain puddles in the streets. "Your atmospheric defenses are vaporized. Your global leaders have surrendered. Drop your weapons, prostrate yourselves upon the asphalt, and prepare to become indentured serf." Vraksh paused, lowering his broadcast wand slightly as his tactical sensor arrays piped a localized audio feed straight into his command bridge. The Supreme Commander frowned, his multi-jointed mandibles clicking in sudden, profound confusion. Instead of the frantic screams of terror, the weeping supplications, or the frantic military sirens his invasion fleet had encountered on every other civilized world in the galaxy, the audio sensors were picking up something entirely different. It sounded like an accordion playing a very aggressive folk tune, punctuated by the rhythmic clinking of glass and a deep, multi-voiced chorus roaring the lyrics to Caledonia. Vraksh blinked his 4 eyes. "Explain this auditory anomaly," he commanded his chief intelligence officer, a trembling, multi-eyed Vraxis. "Are the humans chanting a war dirge? Are they initiating a frantic planetary self-destruct countdown?" The intelligence officer frantically tapped his console, zooming the flagship's optical sensors straight down into the heart of George Square, focusing on a crowded, damp outdoor seating area directly beneath a faded green awning outside a corner pub called the Horseshoe. The optical zoom snapped into focus. There sat 40 Glaswegians. None of them were wearing powered armor. None of them were operating anti-air missile batteries. None of them had even bothered to stand up. At table 3, a middle-aged man wearing a soaked yellow windbreaker and a damp bucket hat calmly took a slow, deliberate sip from a pint glass of dark Scottish stout, wiped the foam from his mustache with the back of his thumb, and looked up at the sky where a 3-mile-long alien warship was hovering 20 feet above a bus stop. "Right," the man said, his thick accent echoing clearly through the alien tactical pickup. "That's the 3rd time this week a big metal bastard has parked in front of the chippy. Pure neck ache trying to watch the rain." Across the table, a younger woman wearing a soaked denim jacket didn't even look up from her bag of salt and vinegar crisps. She popped one into her mouth, chewed thoughtfully, and pointed a finger at the massive, plasma-charged landing ramp slowly lowering from the belly of the Xylarian dreadnought. "Leave it out, Rab," she muttered, tossing a crisp to a very confused stray terrier sitting under the bench. "They're just here to hand out leaflets about their local planet's recycling policy or some shite. Mind that time the Jehovah's Witnesses tried it during the old firm? Same energy, man. Attention, primitive bipeds." Commander Vraksh roared over the planetary comms, his patience wearing thin as his flagship settled lower, kicking up a tidal wave of rain and litter across the square. "You are surrounded by the entirety of the vanguard fleet. Lay down your beverages and submit." Down in the square, Rab, the man in the yellow windbreaker, slowly set his pint glass down on the sticky wooden table. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind of sigh reserved for someone whose football team had just conceded an unnecessary penalty in the 89th minute. He slowly stood up. He didn't grab a rifle. He didn't trigger an energy shield. Instead, he reached down, picked up a heavy, half-empty, 20-ounce ceramic mug of thick, room-temperature draft cider by the handle, and took 3 lazy steps out from under the pub awning, stepping directly into the pouring Scottish rain. He squinted up through the gloom at the towering, four-armed alien commander standing on the open ramp of the dreadnought 300 feet above him. "Ah, shut your hole, you big silver space fairy," Rab yelled at the top of his lungs, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship's anti-gravity generators with crystal-clear hostility. "Some of us are trying to enjoy a quiet pint before the match starts. If you're no buying around, get that giant toaster to my airspace before I get really cranky." The entire command bridge of the Xylarian flagship fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Commander Vraksh's forearms slowly uncrossed. His multi-layered jaw dropped open. In 3,000 cycles of galactic conquest, across 400 subjugated star systems, Vraksh had been met with nuclear fire, chemical weapons, orbital counterattacks, and tearful pleas for mercy. He had never, in his entire multimillennia life, been told to shut his hole by a guy in a damp windbreaker while holding fermented apple juice. What did he just call me?" Vraksh stammered, looking around his bridge at his petrified officers. Did he just threaten the sovereign vanguard with a ceramic receptacle?" Before anyone could answer, the side door of the horseshoe burst open. Out poured another 60 patrons, led by a 70-year-old bouncer named Big Tam, who stood 6'4", weighed 28 stone, and was currently wearing a soaked tartan kilt and a high-vis jacket. Big Tam wasn't holding a plasma rifle either. He was carrying a rolled-up copy of the Daily Record in one hand and a 4-foot-long heavy-duty wooden mop handle in the other. "Right, troops," Big Tam bellowed, his voice rattling the glass windows of the square. "The BAMs in the tin-foil spaceships are blocking the taxi rank. Nobody leaves till we finish these pints, but once that's sorted, someone jays the Nazi droids a wee Glasgow kiss." From behind the bar, the pub's landlord, a stout man named Dougie, stepped onto the threshold carrying a 3-liter plastic jug of lukewarm tap water and a mop bucket. "Come, tell them if they scratch the new asphalt outside, they're paying for the council tax hike." Dougie roared across the street. Down in the square, Rab raised his ceramic mug toward the 3-mile-long flagship in a sarcastic toast. "Here's Teus," Rab shouted. "Was like us." And from 60 patrons scattered across the wet asphalt, a unified, thunderous roar shook the damp Scottish air. "Damn few. And there I did." Suddenly, 36 Xylarian shocktroopers, elite, 8-foot-tall cybernetic infantry clad in heavy plasteel armor and armed with rapid-fire plasma carbines, descended the ramp in tight, synchronized military formation, their red targeting lasers sweeping across the square. "Secure the perimeter," the squad leader barked through his helmet's external speaker. "Annihilate any resistance." The shock troopers hit the wet pavement with heavy metallic thuds, raising their weapons. Rab didn't run. He took one final, unhurried gulp of his cider, wiped his mouth, and hurled the heavy ceramic mug straight through the air with 30 years of amateur Sunday League pub dart precision. Crack. The heavy mug caught the lead Xylarian squad leader squarely in the center of his primary optical visor, shattering into 50 pieces and sending the 8-foot armored behemoth stumbling backward into a row of metal beer kegs stacked outside the pub. "Right, lads?" Big Tam bellowed, twirling his wooden mop handle like a medieval broadsword. "Gi's peace. They're interruptin' country homes and antiques." What followed next was not a battle. It was a statistical impossibility that would be studied by Xylarian military historians for centuries as the Great Embarrassment. An 8-foot cybernetic war machine designed to dismantle planetary defense grids was currently being repeatedly poked in the optical sensor with a splintered mop handle by an elderly man singing a rebel song about a potato famine. 3 elite shock troopers who tried to flank the pub entrance were instantly ambushed by 2 men named Davy and Shug, who didn't use blasters. They simply used a wet metal recycling bin and a very well-aimed traffic cone, trapping the alien vanguard beneath a cascade of empty ginger bottles and crushed lager cans. Up on the flagship bridge, Commander Vraksh stared at his tactical monitors in a state of absolute vegetative catatonia. His invincible vanguard, the terrifying terror legions of the Orion Arm, were currently being chased down George Square by a pack of angry Glaswegians wielding bar stools, wet floor signs and rolled-up tabloids, while a stray dog nipped at the plasteel ankle joints of an elite lieutenant. "Commander," the intelligence officer whispered, his voice shaking with profound psychological trauma. The casualty reports. Sector 4 infantry is retreating. They took a heavy plastic milk crate to the primary coolant vent. Vraksh slowly lowered his forehands. He looked at the hollow map of Earth. He looked at the glowing red warning lights of Sector 0. And then he looked down at the monitor, where Rab was currently leaning against a lamppost, calmly lighting a cigarette while two Xylarian soldiers cowered behind a bus shelter to escape a barrage of wet beer mats. The Supreme Commander reached out a trembling claw, grabbed the master helm control, and slammed the emergency reverse thruster override. "Get us out of here," Vraksh whispered, his voice hollow and broken. "Set a course for the Andromeda Galaxy. Anywhere. Just away from the people with the yellow jackets." Within 42 seconds, 300 dreadnoughts of the Xylarian hegemony, conquerors of empires, slayers of worlds, engaged their hyperspace drives at maximum warp, tearing a hole in the sky and fleeing the Sol system in sheer, unadulterated panic. Back in George Square, the sudden silence of the departing fleet was broken only by the steady patter of the Scottish rain and the muffled hum of the pub's jukebox. Rab took a long drag of his cigarette, exhaled a cloud of gray smoke into the damp air, and looked up at the empty sky. "Told ye," Rab mumbled, turning back toward the warm, yellow glow of the open doorway. "Right, Dougie. Pint's flat. Who's gettin' the next round?"